Hello and welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the Moog. I'll try and say Moog, but Moog is my British default. Grandmother. Here it is. It's an analog monosynth, semi-modular analog synthesizer from Moog, and it's their latest sort of new model. I mean, it's still using that kind of classic Moog synthesis techniques. And I must admit, when I first heard about it coming out, I thought, oh, does the world need another one? I wasn't all that excited, but I got sent one, and I have to say, it feels really authoritative, beautiful, solid. It's a really nice piece of design work. It feels like it's a very pleasing piece of hardware. Right, it does look rather kind of Radio Shack, I know, but the idea was to make it like a combination of sort of classic analog mono together with a nod to their larger format rack modular stuff. Indeed, these modules aren't just a nod to those original modulars, they are actually the same circuit design, although this is SMD technology rather than through hole. So we get the same CP3 mixer with all of that gain and burn. I'll show you a little bit more about that later. The 904 VCF is the same design, the 902 VCA and the 911 envelope. These are all taken from the original designs of that classic Moog modular stuff. And as you can see, all the knobs and the faders just feel very, well, one fader, feel very, very nice. I mean, they haven't spared any expense, it feels like, on the build quality. We've got a lot of patching capabilities. It's obviously normaled, as you'd expect, and a few twists beside. And in fact, you know, when I got it out of the box, it immediately sort of changed my mind a little bit. And I thought, actually, this feels really kind of something special. So how special is it? So let's start with the oscillators. They're in blue here, and we get the full waves. So if we look up here, we've got basically triangle, sawtooth, square, and pulse width with variable pulse width. Sync between 1 and 2. Oscillator 2 is slightly different in that you can sync it. It's got a tunable frequency range and a linear FM in. So if we now look at what's going on in the scope, starting with a triangle wave. Nice solid fundamental down there. You can see there's actually a good quality waveform. It feels very solid. If we take it up to a sawtooth, again, really nice shape to it, good sort of buzz, and it really does sound very Moogy. You know, there's no denying. It's got that kind of solid, weighty authority. Again, really solid, fundamental down there. If we take it up, I'm actually taking the waveform directly out of the wave out and into my scope, so it's not going through any of the other stuff. Let's take it up to a square wave. As you can see here, 32, 16, 8, 4. I've also got octave shift. And we can modulate the pulse width. So and if I switch the wave over to the sort of skinny pulse width, it means that we can get that nice through zero. But it's got quite an interesting tail to it, but you can dial it in quite nicely. But again, these waves just sound really solid. And I should point out that if you bring up that second oscillator, just about halfway, worth mentioning that this is in fact goes from 16 to 2 and plus or minus about a fifth. So if we now bring both oscillators in, take the pulse width off this one, you can start to hear the effects of what the CP3 mixer does, which adds all this additional drive. And that is the feature of the CP3. You know, it provides all this additional distortion, and it was a feature that was kind of has been heralded as one of the sort of, it's almost like as much of the Moog sound as perhaps the filter is, the classic filter. And you're getting access to this in effectively, you know, a synthesizer of this price, because it is the same circuit. But you know, if you don't want the drive, then you definitely want to be the other side of 12 o'clock. If you do want the drive, it adds up. So if you've got 3 inputs coming in, they're all cranked, then you're going to get more drive out of it. But it's very much a character of the original Moog modular stuff. Now, before we get onto any filters or anything, one thing that's really cool is the LFO is actually very powerful. As well as being an LFO, we can actually take the keyboard CV out, take that into the rate, and it will track CV extremely well. Then we'll take the wave out here and we'll go into the mixer, into the noise section. So I'll turn everything else down and now turn this up, and we come back up here, I'll tune it. Let's take that out of there so we can see the wave out of it as well. So we can see nice clean wave. So let's try the ramp down. A little bit trickier to get it tuned just right because you're effectively using the rate knob. Though there is a little fine tune trick, and you press the shift button, which is the central button here, and then adjusting the knob gets you fine-tuned, so it's easier to tune it against the other oscillators. And of course, that is one thing that means you can do, is you can create 3-note chords. Maybe put a bit of filter on that. You have to make sure, obviously, that you're being very careful with the levels because of the CP3 mixer is going to blow up, but I can show you what that's going to sound like. Kind of fairly grungy, isn't it? So let's get on to the filter. This is the filter section here in a sort of fetching lime green. And as is usual, what we'll do is we'll start with let's just do a sawtooth into the filter and give it a sweep. Got that classic Moog kind of blat, that sort of brassy, that's only the thing that a Moog does. Yes, this also has that kind of classic ladder filter characteristic, and that is bring the resonance in, all that bottom end disappears, but you get that real kind of quack. Would have maybe liked to have seen a little deviation from the classic ladder, maybe put a compensation switch, because some ladder filters, what they do is they're aware that the bottom end drops off, so they add an extra circuit which adds this kind of bottom end emphasis, so you get a much smoother frequency response. So you still get the resonance, but the bottom end doesn't drop off so much. So maybe it would have been nice if there could have been like a switchable circuit here to be kind of classic ladder filter, or the standard ladder filter response. So that missed a little bit of a trick there, but I can sort of forgive it because the rest of it does sound so good. So while we're doing this, let's get a bit more of the other stuff involved. So we'll get the envelope involved here. And it's quite interesting because the envelope, we've got a switchable keyboard track here, by the way, 1 to 2 off, or 1 to 1, and we can get really nice snappy envelopes. And they've got this. This was really quite interesting because this is a very light fader. It's sort of like a DJ fader, and but weirdly it's on the sustain. It would have made more sense to me to have this on the decay. I suppose you can can kind of play it like that. It's an interesting idea, and I kind of like the idea of it, but like I say, it would have been made more sense for me anyway to have it on the decay portion. But you know, maybe I'm just not using it right. Another little trick I want to show you, if we don't want to drive the filter all that hard, we can come out of the VCA output, the CP3 output, into the input, and then come from the output into the filter, which gives us attenuation on the amount of drive that goes into the filter. And by the same token, we can also take the velocity of the keyboard out and go into the envelope amount. So velocity will now play a part in how wide the filter opens, but it means that we can have a little bit of variation in how we want to have the filter driving. So we can go maybe take it down so the CP3 is not really doing all that much. Or we can drive the CP3 hard, but not the filter hard. And then if we drive the filter hard, we get all that extra sort of low harmonics into the filter, and it just adds a different, we can mess around with the drive structure of the CP3 and also the filter separately. So let's take a look at the rear connections. We've got a power switch and a 12-volt DC power supply, which is an inline version, which has an IEC connection, not a figure of 8. There's USB for MIDI, which is class compliant, little MIDI indicator to show you're getting some MIDI. Nice to see in, out and through represented on full jacks there. We've got the sequencer collections here, clock output for driving external kit, reset in so you can re-trigger the sequence at a particular point in time, sequencer on and off, and an external clock input. Then we've got reverb out, which is kind of wet output, then Eurorack out, which is essentially just the main output but on an 1/8 inch jack, audio input on 1/4 inch, audio output on 1/4 inch, that's not balanced, that's just a straight jack, and then finally master tune on a little tiny knob here for tuning the whole instrument. We'll bring in the third oscillator stroke LFO, come out of there, go into, let's go into the attenuator, because the attenuator is quite useful. So we're going to the attenuator, then we'll come out of the attenuator and into the linear FM, because it is quite possible to audio rate mod these oscillators by varying them. I'm going to use this, but I could easily use one of the other oscillators. And linear FM in, now I did read up on this. Essentially there are two ways. You have an exponential and linear NFM. Exponential, the voltage response is like this. In linear, it's more like this, which is what you get in a DX7, which means it's easier to dial in sort of tuned amounts, so it feels more musical somehow. And it's usually only common in digital synths, so to have it in an analog synth is a nice touch. Right, so I'm also going to bring in the sequencer to play, because this is another thing that's worth checking out. The sequencer there's a 3-pattern sequencer, each with 256 steps. You can play it the order, forward, backwards, and random. So I'm going to go forward, I'm going to hit record into sequence 2, and now I can just play a sequence in here. So I'm just going to see if I can play this. You can put rests and what have you in, but I'm not going to get into that. Right, so now I go into sequence mode, press play, which is down here on these buttons, and hold, and if I press go on the keys, we can start to kind of get dial it. And I'm using the attenuator here to dial in positive and negative amounts of FM. resonance up. So that covers the sequencer. I mean, also there's an arpeggiator in here, which is quite nice, but you can get to feel the filter's got that. There's an old Monty Python sketch where two blokes are talking about what sounds, what sort of qualities words have. And people say, oh yes, that's a very woody word, that's a very tinny word. And this sounds woody. It's got this kind of like solid, organic feel to it. And oh yes, okay, it's not getting me that, when the resonance kicks in and the bottom end goes out. Yes, it does the Moog thing, but it's got a very creamy kind of vibe to it, and it feels very nice. While we're on the subject of the oscillators, I should quickly point out the sync capabilities. So hit it in, put it into sync. Very nice. Really sort of classic analog sync vibe. It does highlight a limitation. Obviously, it'd be really nice to be able to sweep maybe the VCO 2 on the pitch wheel, so we could get that. But there aren't many options, particularly if I'm already using the single LFO as maybe an oscillator source. I can, though, however, switch the VCA mode into keyboard gate, which means that I'm not using the envelope, and then I suppose I could do the envelope out, maybe into the attenuator, and then into the pitch in. And then I can use the attenuator to kind of affect the amount. But I guess what I'm saying is it highlights the fact that obviously we've only got a single envelope and a single LFO, and if you're using the LFO as a VCO, of which is very good, then your modulation sources are a little bit limited. Okay, so let's get another patch on the go just to demonstrate a few more features of the synth. I've got a little sequence I'm running here. Just a single oscillator. Now I'm going to take the sample and hold out of the modulation source, but I'm clocking it from the sequencer clock, or syncing it, and that basically restarts the waveform every time there's a sync pulse. So be sort of in time. So that's quite nice. Another thing that you perhaps haven't seen is there's also a spring reverb. So if I, which is actually quite nice. You can tell it's a spring reverb because when you do this, it does that classic spring reverb thing. So there is a little spring reverb in here, which is kind of nice. It's not particularly, you know, it's just a spring reverb. It's not going to get you too crazy. You can have it the full wet mix, which is kind of cool. It's quite nice. Another thing that you can do, that means I've got the output of the spring reverb here because you get a separate output of it. And I'm going to try and bring that into the pitch mod of Oscillator 2. So I'm getting an audio signal out of here and I'm bringing it into the pitch mod. So it's quite interesting. Bring up the noise source as well. So there's an interesting thing. Another thing that we haven't mentioned, there's also a little high pass filter here, so we'll drop that in there, come out of there and into the Oscillator 1 input. So we've got an extra high pass filter. Neither the high pass filter nor the attenuator are modulatable, which is a shame. That's getting quite interesting, isn't it? So one thing again to reiterate, it really does feel like a solid instrument. You know, the build quality and the way that it's put together just feels like it's built to last. The keybed is really nice, the knobs and all of that side of things just feel really solid and like it's probably going to last you a while. And let's not forget, you're also getting access to those circuits from the original Moog modular stuff. The CP3 mixer, the filter, the envelope and the VCA all kind of add to the sort of the kind of Moog sound that perhaps you can't get in other Moogs. So it's not exactly the same as every other Moog that come out there. There's a lot of legacy circuitry in here that you're not going to get in any other Moog. Having said that, it comes at a cost, even though when you consider some of those modular circuits are really expensive. 879 UK pounds, dollars will scroll below, but I feel like it doesn't feel like it's terribly expensive. I mean, I suppose, you know, there are some limitations. Like I say, I would have liked to have seen a little variant on that filter just so that we got less of that bass roll off on the resonance. And of course, you know, another envelope or another LFO is always worth having. But I don't feel like it's outrageously expensive. It just feels like, you know, you're paying for a quality instrument. Anyway, that's it. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.